thank you for joining us today. I am Lydia, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this conversation with Michael, and we'll talk about how we know each other in a second. We're going to talk for the next hour or so about the early days of Spyce, and we'll explain what Spyce is in a second. But the focus really is what we learned building and scaling the team and how we frankly navigated the ups and downs of an early stage startup. We'll leave some time at the end for questions, so I hope you'll have questions for us, or I will make them up on the spot and just pepper you with more. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about Spyce and its founding. And we're being reminded right now, friendly reminder, cell phones muted, please, would be great. See, I have a note here, I was gonna do it. So, Michael, Spyce began with a pretty bold vision. And I know it started earlier than some startups do, with a group of students and a robot chef. So take us back to the beginning. What inspired you to start Spyce, and what was the problem you were trying to solve?
Thanks, Lydia. I've told the story many times. This is the most honest version of it. In the fall of 2014, I was in grad school. I was really, really inspired by other students around me who'd started companies. And, I'd just done an internship at SpaceX, and I really hated it. I thought that was my dream job. And it was also my first time not being on a meal plan. I didn't get as much free food as I guess Lydia did in grad school. And I was frustrated by the price of food. I was interested in robotics. I learned about the labor shortage in the restaurant industry. And, I also had like a love-hate relationship with cooking. I was both passionate about it, but also frustrated to have to do it all the time. I, like somebody who doesn't know how to cook, was cooking a lot of stir fry because, chop it up, throw it in a pan. And then I had this idea for a stir fry robot. That's how it started. That's how the idea for Spyce. That's how the idea for Spyce started.
I love that. And tell me, I think probably some of the students in the room, you started as an undergrad. How did you, actually, we were chatting about this right before we started. How did you find your co-founders, and how did you ultimately decide coming out of school, we were going to do this thing, we're going to commit?
Yeah, it was a project. I wanted my friends and me to build a stir-fry robot together, which then turned into a bowl robot. Then it was a automated restaurant. So like the idea evolved, but I wasn't looking for co-founders. I was looking for people that would join me on a project for 1 month and then see kind of where it goes. I asked my closest friends and teammates in college if they wanted to work on me with it, and they were down. And this is now January of 2015. So I spent the fall just, obsessing over the idea. And it wasn't until January of 2016, the entire 12 months later, that we said, okay, let's sign some paperwork and start a company and try to raise some funding. And we had this deal with ourselves. We said, we're graduating in June. If we've raised $500,000 by the time June rolls around, we'll do it full time. That's the deal. And if not, we'll go and get jobs.
And I'm assuming you did.
And we did. We raised a little more than that, actually. We raised $2 million before June. And so then we had no choice but to do it.
And I have seen some of the early prototypes. Actually, early on in Spyce, we had a video we put together for our team showing the origins of Spyce. It was all of you, I think, working in a basement. And back to the stir-fry robot idea, when the wok was done rotating, it would sort of lift up and deposit your food into a bowl.
Deposit is a good way to put it.
Except in the video I saw, you chuck the food across the room. So you raised money off that.
Yeah, there's been many times in the journey that I wondered why food. It's I've done a lot of food cleaning in my life. I've probably crammed more food into a Honda Civic than anybody in this room. It's definitely been a journey.
And to quickly introduce myself, I joined Spyce a bit later. So I was actually hired by Michael and his co-founders at, how many employees did you have at that point?
We had 9 in the office, and we had 9 in the restaurant.
Yeah. And my background is in HR. I headed people and culture at Spyce. And Frankly, what brought me to Spyce was I was coming out of my graduate program, which was a master's degree in HR. I'd worked in tech previously at an early stage company, and I wanted to do it again. I love early stage craziness, and it is crazy. It's a lot of fun, a lot of experimenting.
I'm actually curious, I've never asked, you could have done a few different things, and you joined the 18-person company with one restaurant, and why?
Yeah, so full transparency, I wanted to be in Boston, and so I was only applying to jobs in Boston, so you got lucky that you were based in Boston. But I wanted to do tech, and I wanted to do early stage, but I wanted to do something a little bit different than my last company, which was pure SaaS software. And I was really interested that this was both a robotics company, which was new to me, and also there was an hourly team. There was a restaurant team. And in HR, doing HR for salaried and hourly employees is pretty different. And so I was like, this will be an interesting challenge. Full transparency, Spyce had 4 co-founders. And as an early employee, you're always a little scared by that because am I going to have 4 bosses? Are these 4 people going to get along? Am I going to be trying to make 4 different people happy? And I'm actually really excited to share that, it actually worked out. But
it didn't suck.
It didn't suck. It didn't. That's why we're still friends to this day. But this segues us nicely into my point, which is you hired me, but really your co-founder, Kale, hired me. I actually don't think you wanted to hire me. And I actually, so I don't know if any of you read the description of this session. We promised raw and real. So this is the raw and real part. We didn't work together very well initially, if that's fair to say. Oh God, now I've just revealed that apparently I was off base.
No, it's definitely true. My co-founder Kale at that point had been the one doing the HR responsibilities, which I understood to be he ran payroll every 2 weeks. He set up Blue Cross Blue Shield health insurance and fielded the complaints when we couldn't figure it out. He set up an annual review process, but we were a small team. And at the time, I viewed it very much as like an administrative role. And how wrong I was, by the way. But I wanted to hire an entry-level employee that was just going to come in and run payroll and also be the office manager and stock the snacks and make sure the printer worked and that kind of thing. And my co-founder, Kale, had a different opinion of the type of profile that we should hire. I'm not sure where he got it, but he got a much earlier appreciation than I did for the importance of people and culture and being deliberate about it. Whereas I just thought, if you hire great people, it'll be a great culture. But then the thing that really sold me, actually, was I went to listen to a talk by Howard Schultz in a format not too different from this. Howard Schultz is the founder of Starbucks. And somebody in a Q&A, somebody asked, what's the biggest mistake you've seen startups make? And he said, 2. I've seen two big mistakes. The first one is they don't hire HR early enough. And I was like, well, check, we're doing it. And then the second one is, and they don't give them a seat at the table. And I was like, what? And yeah, we sort of totally, I went back to Boston and we totally changed the plan after that talk. We'd actually found someone we were going to hire, and then we sort of decided not to make them an offer, and we reposted the role as a very different role. And then we were honestly very lucky enough to meet Lydia, which at the time I took for granted. And it wasn't until years later that I realized, wow, we got really, really lucky.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll echo that. I have now, since we'll talk in a little bit about the end of Spyce, which ultimately that Spyce was acquired by Sweetgreen, and Michael actually still works for Sweetgreen on the same tech that Spyce built, but for Sweetgreen. I left at the acquisition, which is common for the HR person. I've since gone on and worked at 3 different startups, and all hired me at different points in their development. I was actually even hired by a startup with 500 people who had never had HR, and I will tell you, mistake. I don't just want job security. I will tell you, just mistake, just flat out mistake.
But I want to kick it back to you because you're right. Our early working relationship, I mean, it wasn't horrible. We weren't yelling at each other. But I definitely don't think we kicked it off right away.
Yeah.
What was your impression of why that was?
Yeah, so if I reflect on it, it was very clear to me that Kale, one of your co-founders who was the COO, was bought into what I was doing. And then the other two co-founders, I think, were also pretty bought in. And I got a sense from you that, if I'm being blunt, you didn't see the point in what I was doing, if that makes sense. And I think you saw the point in I was running payroll and the administrative stuff, but some of the more culture side things, I instituted a monthly manager sort of like workshop where all of our managers came together. And
I remember that first one.
Yeah.
Lydia did this thing at Spyce where she, at the end of a meeting, she would ask all of the attendants of the meeting, I want you to rate this meeting fist to 5, like fist to 5. 5 means the meeting was super useful. It was a great use of my time, and 0 or fist means it was not useful at all. It shouldn't have happened. And so Lydia explained what fist to 5 meant to us. It was like, I don't know, 4 of us. It was like our very first, I think it was manager training or maybe prepping for manager training or manager, I can't quite remember, but it was something around developing leadership skills, which at the time I thought came naturally to you. And, is not really true. But I remember Lydia said, okay, everyone do fist to 5. And, a bunch of people, there was like a 5 and a 4 and then a 5. And I remember, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I remember I gave a 2.
I'm glad you were honest.
Yeah. That's where we started.
Yeah. So I think that is why I thought Michael didn't really think I was doing a good job, shockingly. And hey, listen, I appreciate that honesty. I actually think it's a lesson in psychological safety in the workplace that if you ask for feedback, you should be open to it. But then Michael, and I will move off this topic in a second because we've got some other exciting stuff to talk about. What ultimately convinced you of what I was doing? I don't think I can take too much credit for it, but was there a moment when you realized this is making an impact at Spyce or this is needed at Spyce?
I think it's when I started to, I think it's when a few things went poorly with regards to people. Mm-hmm. When I had somebody who reported to me really unsatisfied with the way I was leading them, or when I saw interpersonal issues, or when I had interpersonal issues. And I think that you subtly, whenever there were problems, I was really glad you were around. And so I think over a period of time, I came to realize that, wow, we can solve a lot of problems if we're proactive about the way we set up our people and culture. And I would say it took maybe 6 months to a year.
That's probably fair.
Something like that.
Yeah. But I will say, I would now consider you a very close friend. And we haven't worked together for, I think, maybe 4 years now.
Yeah.
You were at my wedding last year. I was at your wedding. Actually, we got married the same year to different people, of course, but we were at each other's weddings. I think it's funny how a friendship really grew from, in that first week, I was like, I don't know this Michael nut. He's kind of hard to crack.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really realize how much support and coaching you can get from a people partner. And I think that was probably one of the biggest impacts you had at Spyce. And not just for me, I just mean for coaching, leaders in their 20s are going to be immature leaders. And yeah, I think that was one of the biggest impacts that you had.
I do want to change focuses slightly because I want to talk a bit about, in some extent, our working relationship, I think mirrored Spyce, that we were all kind of figuring out how to grow from a pretty scrappy team into a more formal, well-oiled machine, right? But I think there are still points in any startup, and you might be experiencing this now, anyone in this room, where you're worried things might not work, right? There's been challenges. And I do want to talk in a second about how culture is what will carry your team through those moments. But in order to do that, Michael, I think it's helpful for you to level set to the room. Were there moments where you really worried that Spyce wasn't going to make it, or where we really encountered challenges so they can understand how the culture helped?
Absolutely. I'm sure you remember some of those moments, but there were absolutely moments when I thought that we were going to run out of money and that would be it. There were we were running a restaurant company in the middle of COVID. Our restaurants were doing pretty bad. We were having a hard time fundraising. We Yeah. And so, I mean, 100%. There were absolutely moments. And, you know, as a founder, that's the biggest fear is like the thing just totally dies. You put so many years into it and it just totally dies.
And I'm curious, in those moments, and I honestly, the one that I'll call out is we were running a restaurant during COVID. We actually closed the restaurants for months, wasn't it? Yeah. And part of that, the entire team took pay cuts. Across the board, we all took pay cuts.
25% pay cuts.
Right, which looking back, I took for granted that the team collectively bought into that because I have since worked now at 3 other companies, and if y'all go to my LinkedIn, you'll see those companies, and so I don't want to badmouth them, but that would have never been a possibility at those companies. The culture wasn't there, the sense of camaraderie. Like I've sat in board meetings and thought, well, I could suggest that we all take pay cuts. I just knew it wouldn't fly because it just wasn't there. So what made Spyce so special? What was special about us that when we had to do those hard things, people didn't love it, but they were in it. They were bought in. They were okay with doing it.
I think that there was, the generic answer is I think there was intentional culture building. The more sort of specific answer was one of the co-founders, Brady, viewed it as truly a part of his job to build culture. He had, you probably remember these things more than me, but he introduced something called Spyce names. You can tell the story.
I should have brought my jacket. So Spyce name comes out of when the 4 of you, right. I think some news article referred to you as the Spyce Boys.
I actually think I think we refer to ourselves, and then the news article quoted it.
Oh, I wasn't going to make you guilty for that, but okay, you all started it.
We started it.
You started it.
Yeah.
And so then you all gave yourselves different Spice Girl names.
I was Sporty Spice.
You were Sporty Spice, which tracks. And then as you hired people, you decided you'd give them Spice names, but there's only 5 Spice Girls, so you had to start coming up with new names. And it's not just like you threw out a name. Brady was so intentional about it. It would usually happen at the 90-day mark, and he'd get a group of people together, and we'd brainstorm the name, and it was a reflection of the person, and it showed to them how much we knew them and saw them and recognized them. My Spice name, for example, was Woof, W-O-O-F, and it has a dual meaning. One is that I have dogs. I was fostering dogs at the time. I love dogs. But I also had a background in sustainable agriculture, and years before Spyce, I had been woofing. It's an agricultural program internationally. And the fact that Brady remembered that about me, like 90 days into having met him as a coworker, when he gave me the name and we all got them embroidered on jackets. I still have my jacket. I was like, oh, Brady,
yeah,
you know me.
And this is like one thing that he did, but you know, he did a lot of things that made it feel like we were like truly a team, not just coworkers. And so I felt like there was probably this sense of team camaraderie that wasn't organic. I think it was pretty intentional. Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is that, and I only came to appreciate this years later, but actually, I'll touch on this later. I'll save it. We're going to get to it.
All right. Well, then something else I want you to talk about, which is, because I want to give you a compliment now, which is something else that I think kind of unified us as a team was very clear direction and purpose. Honestly, I think you and Kale and Brady and Luke were really good at communicating to the larger team, this is what we're doing and this is the why. It's also really helpful that we had a physical product so we could see the impact we were having. I have almost in all my jobs worked on physical products, which are actually a nice thing for building culture because you can like touch it, you can feel it, you can eat the food. For those of you maybe founding like a more software-based product, it's a little bit more like in the cloud. You don't have quite as much like, this is the thing we're building in the same way, so just a call out. But were you intentional about like sharing the why with us, helping us all be focused, or is that just something?
I think Kale was.
Okay.
Kale was super bought into this idea that every company had to have a mission, vision, and values. And it had to be written down and shared with the team. And he would put so much effort into what is our mission, vision, and values.
Okay. Great.
And and you know, there were definitely points in time that I was like, okay, maybe we should just try to make money. Maybe that should be the point of the company.
That sounds like you.
Right. And, I would remind him, I was like, like according to a Delaware C Corp, a company exists to make money for its shareholders, maximum. But, he had this kind of belief that you can't build culture unless you have mission, vision, and values. And it sort of came down to, yes, all three are important, but actually having an overarching mission was probably the most important of like, what are we all coming to work to do beyond make money? That was important to, like, he would reiterate it at the beginning of every all hands meeting. This is our mission. And actually at Sweetgreen today, where I work now, it's the exact same thing. And it really makes a big difference when it comes to like building culture and retaining really, really talented people. Yeah.
I think it does. Sorry. I think it does. Let me ask you quickly now about sort of hiring and building the team, because again, maybe quick audience participation. Who here is thinking about building their team, maybe hiring a team member the next 6 months to a year? Okay, all right, cool. Great, this will be relevant for you. For everyone else, write it down and reference it in the future when you need it. So when I joined, again, Spyce was like 15 total, like nine
Yep.
headquarter people. And I think most of them were MIT. They were from your network. They were, you had gone to school with them. Is that
friends,
right?
classmates, friends of friends, people in my network.
So what was that like initially, having the team be from your personal network? And then why did we start to expand it, or when and why?
It was, about as easy as it's going to get is when it's everybody in your network. Like, it only lasts so long. But there are some real advantages with that. We began to expand when we realized that it takes more than talented engineers to build a restaurant company, because that's what we were building. We were building a restaurant company. And actually, gosh, I'm giving Kale a lot of credit in this talk. Kale had this idea that we can hire people a lot more experienced than us and a lot older than us. Like, we were, call it 24 at the time. And I had a hard time envisioning why people like that would want to work for us. He really shot for the stars when it came to hiring, and he was right. Like, if you communicated a strong enough mission, you could recruit really, really, really talented people that had a lot more experience than you in areas that you don't have experience in. What was your opinion? Because you joined when we were just, friends, just like a group of friends.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun to join at that time because you were all clearly friends, and there was already a bit of a culture there because you were friends. But I'm a big believer in, especially a company like Spyce, but frankly any company, if you're building a product that's supposed to touch everyone, I mean, a restaurant everyone is going to come eat at, you have to have a diversity of people there to help offer perspective.
Would you have done anything differently in terms of hiring from 9 to we grew to 30?
No, I think again, to give us credit, I think we did it right, because I think very quickly after I got there, we sort of started to hire more broadly. I've joined companies at about 50 or 60 where it still is very much an insular group, and there's a lot of groupthink, and that can be a dangerous thing. An example I'll give, and I'm not going to call them out by name, but were one of our senior hires and actually are fantastic. But they had a suggestion when we were discussing delivery. For a period of time, remember, we were going to deliver on electric mopeds? Remember that?
I remember.
Yes, electric mopeds in winter in Boston. What could go wrong?
Right.
Not every idea is a good idea. But because we were going to use our own delivery fleet, we weren't going to use a third party. There was like, how do we maximize this? How do we and the idea was, well, the delivery person can hang around after they drop your food and like say hi or like give you a freebie. And I've
actually erased that from my memory.
Yeah, because I think I was in the room, and I might have been at the time maybe the only woman in the room. I went, if my delivery person hung around, I would be terrified.
Yeah.
Like, as a single woman at the time living alone, that would make me profoundly uncomfortable. And it's an extreme example, but I think it's a good one, because that's why you need to have those diversity of perspective in the room.
I actually, I was going to say, I think we could have hired people that were less like us sooner in our journey. It's funny. It's like, at the time when I was 26, I thought I wanted to hire people with about 4 years of experience. Go figure, I had 4 years of experience. And now I'm 33, and I'm like, we should hire people with about 10 years of experience. That seems about right. And like, go figure. That's how. And I wish I'd figured that out sooner. Actually, that there's the right a right person for the right role, and to hire people that aren't just in your network or that you're comfortable with, or hire outside of your comfort zone sooner. I wish we'd done that sooner, and I wish we'd done it more. Like when I look back, it's like we did it for a couple of key hires here and there. But I think I wish we'd done it more. Yeah.
And before we move on quickly, I'd love to hear about two very senior hires we made, Jed and Jeff. I think brought something to Spyce because they were so experienced. What did they bring? What perspectives did they help?
Yeah, there was something about the maturity that a leader like that brings that lifts everybody up. And again, I'm talking in the context of a startup founded by recent grads or grad students or undergrads. There's like this kind of like when someone who has a lot of experience comes in the room, and Jeff did that in particular. You know, Jeff was hired as a VP of culinary and operations, and he actually made a big impact on the engineering team, which is kind of crazy to say, but he helped the engineering team mature their systems, and he mentored some people, actually people that reported to me, and helped a lot in that fashion. And I remember when we hired Jeff, I could not fathom paying that high of a salary to someone. I just couldn't. I was like, how could one person be worth all that much? And now I'm like, wow, he was worth double that.
Have you told him that?
I have, actually. I have.
Good, I'm glad.
I have.
Good. Let's talk. Actually, I wasn't going to have us do this, but let's actually talk, because I think hiring is a good one to focus on because it's something that's going to come up. Let's talk about a mistake that maybe we made in hiring. And maybe, and I don't want to talk about like the wrong person, but like in general, what's maybe the biggest thing we did wrong that you can think of? And I have something in the back of my mind.
Yeah,
but
you go.
No, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have anything?
I kind of do, yeah.
I'm going to let you go then.
The traditional form of a software team is you have a tech lead, you have developers, and you have a product manager. That's the way a software team works, and that's what people told me. And we had a tech lead and we had developers. We didn't have a product manager. And I was really close friends with somebody who was a product manager for Toast, which is like a restaurant POS company. And I was like, gosh, this is perfect. I can make my team perfect. And so I made it happen. You know, I hired that person, and it sort of turned out that our tech lead really enjoyed doing the product management. And I kind of took that away from him, and it caused a lot of interpersonal issues. And it's something that if I had, like, I was going with the conventional wisdom, conventional knowledge. If I'd used a little bit more, I guess, like, if I'd spoken to the people on that team, I would have quickly realized that this is not a need that we have here, despite it being conventional wisdom. And I think there's a little bit of like I wish like, you know, you could trust your gut a little bit more rather than, you know, the mentor on the board who looks at your org chart once every 3 months during a board meeting and says, it looks like you're missing a product manager. That's a mistake that comes to mind. What about you?
I think this is actually less on hiring, truthfully, and it's more on, we ran into the same problem I've seen almost every startup encounter, which is we had some very early stage hires who, as the company evolved and the roles evolved, frankly, the role in the company evolved away from what they wanted to do and what they were best at doing. And that's a really hard conversation to have with somebody. Like, it's not a fun thing to sit down and be like, you don't seem happy here, let's talk about it. And I think we avoided that conversation I know we did. I think it's not fun to have. Ultimately, we had it, and I think we navigated it well, but if we had done it sooner, it would have caused the team a lot less stress, and also, I think, frankly, that individual as well, because they knew that this wasn't the right fit for them anymore, but they weren't able to call it, and they were looking to us to make that call, and we, I think, sat on it too long.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I recently gave Brady the feedback of, you know, now we're a much bigger company, that not every role and every position, every person has to work out. Statistically, there are some that will not work out. And it's just about being a little bit more honest with yourself. Yeah. It's actually still something we still struggle with. But
It's not an easy thing. I always encourage a more open approach of it. Otherwise, it just, I don't know. I've sat on the wrong side of a table and realized this job is not the job I should have. I was the right hire by the wrong company, if that makes sense. But I sat there feeling that tension and feeling that discomfort. And I didn't want to say anything as the employee. And I really had wished that my manager had maybe said, hey, this isn't going well. Can we talk about it?
right.
But he, names will not be said, also didn't say anything. So we just had this very uncomfortable 6 months where every day I was waking up feeling, I don't feel good in this job. I really don't. And so I think more candor and open conversation is always better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am curious, what helped you be comfortable having those conversations? For anyone in the room who's maybe facing a difficult conversation with a co-founder, with a team member, what got you comfortable kind of delivering, I don't know, that kind of feedback?
Probably the first time we did it, and it worked out for the better for all parties.
So pull the Band-Aid off? That's your advice? Just do it?
Yeah. Like, we did it with an employee that was great for the first 2 or 3 years, but then, not only did we come out of it much better, that employee came out of it much better. He did something that was much more appropriate for him, and he's really happy. And I think that, I don't know, just having done it once makes me more confident doing it again. I can't give you advice for how to do it the first time, though.
So the advice really is just do it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My advice would be, how about this? I'll step in, is honestly like workshop it and practice it. If you have an HR person, they're a great person to practice with. You could practice it in the mirror. I've recently built a chat GPT bot to make my managers practice difficult conversations at the company. It is not the replacement of actual verbal conversation, but it's a good I've taught the chat bot to be difficult.
Yeah.
So if they say something, like they type in something, I've taught the chat bot to be like, why would you say that? So they can get comfortable sort of responding to something that will likely never happen, but it's good to sort of prepare so you can be more comfortable in those conversations.
Actually, this reminds me of something Jeff taught us. Jeff, he said, this is going to sound so corporate, but I promise you it's so true. Jeff said, the first time someone's hearing about their poor performance shouldn't be in their annual review cycle. And everybody knows this already?
Michael.
Gosh, I thought I was imparting wisdom. All right, let's move on.
Okay, all right. We'll just keep shuffling along there.
Yeah.
Actually, this one segues nicely because this is actually kind of into handling conflict. And I actually want you to talk about, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
If you're okay with that.
Yep.
It's not actually what we prepped. So
oh, no.
You ready? I want to talk about, did you ever have conflict between your co-founders?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Checkbox. Why? What happened? Talk us through it.
It was often with Kale because, he and I shared a lot of the management responsibilities, and we have, different personalities and different opinions. And, it doesn't actually really matter where most conflicts come from, but it usually comes from what each person thinks they should prioritize. And doesn't even really matter who is right or wrong. I think what matters with conflict and, with Kale was how we ultimately learned to work together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you can probably tell the story better than me, but we had a period of time in our working relationship where we would argue. Whenever the debate happened is when we were debated, and because we were close friends, and a debate could sound a little bit like an argument, and sometimes it was an argument. And I would say that the first step that it took to repair that, or to move past that, was learning not to do it in the context of a bigger meeting.
Yeah, so Michael,
I think you maybe flagged that.
Yeah, Michael's referring to the time not that long into me joining Spyce. I think I pulled you two aside after a meeting and went like, "You guys can't fight in front of the team. Like this is not productive. You're making everyone feel really nervous right now. Like you're allowed to have conflict, but the team needs to see productive conflict. And what we just saw wasn't productive." Also, I'm not that eloquent in real life. I've had a lot of time to reflect on that. I think in the moment I was like, "Guys, what was that?"
Yeah. No, I actually remember that. And also, the other thing I'll say about conflict is there's not that much of it when things are going well.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, like when we raised a $20 million Series A, we were not really in conflict. Yeah. Conflict happens when things are going sideways. And I think when you take a step back and realize that, it helps contextualize a lot of the problems. Because, the bulk of the conflict we had was when the business was not doing well. Yeah. When we were running out of cash, when we were in trouble, that's when the conflict happened. I'm actually curious because I remember, we had our emotional ups and downs. And all I remember when we sat down with you is you were pretty calm all the time. Or at the very least, you didn't seem bothered by the fact that we had 6 months of runway and no fun, or, like
the restaurants were closed and we all had to wear masks and we're taking pay cuts. Yeah, that wasn't great. That was not a great moment.
Versus like, I'm actually what kept you so cool? Like, your job was on the line too. Like your career was you bet a lot on it.
So it's funny, you're not the first person to have shared that observation. For me, I've a number of people I've worked with. Actually, I have a rule that I don't become friends with coworkers until I no longer work with them. So I have a number of friends who were coworkers, and then immediately after leaving the job, I was like, we're going to be friends now, and we are friends. And at some point in that friendship developing, they would go, you always seem so like collected in meetings or calm, or you were inscrutable. I didn't know what you were thinking in a meeting. And it is the exact opposite of who I am in my personal life. I am kind of chaotic in my personal life. And I don't know, I think it is because I carry, it's not a weight, but I feel an obligation that in my role, people are looking to me for answers. And if I look like I know what's going on, they're gonna feel better, and then I'll feel better, and it becomes this delightful feedback loop. So I think I'm pretty aware that I like to be open and transparent, but in a way that I think brings like a level of calmness or a sense of like competency. And when we did rehearse this talk in a very loose way, just to make sure we had some sense of what we were gonna say. And I don't know if you remember, I said, and not to talk politics here, but the mayor of Boston, we both live in Boston, Michelle Wu, just went in front of Congress recently for some interesting reasons, and clips of that made the rounds. She came across as so like just collected and competent and in control of a pretty like chaotic situation. And I remember watching that and being like, I feel such a sense of just, I don't know, like comfort watching that. And that's what I want people to see when they look to me in times of chaos. So that's probably where it comes from.
And I would say that that's probably, when times were good or medium, I would say the people person in a startup, their biggest impact is mentoring managers. I would say when times got really, really tough, the biggest impact of the people person of a startup is actually mentoring the founders and the CEO, because it's very, very alone at that period of time.
Yeah.
And when the founders are freaking out, somebody has to be calm. Like somebody has to be chill.
Yeah, I say this statement cautiously because I don't want to be like, poor CEOs, because CEOs have it decent. But I think an early stage company, the CEO is a very lonely job. Mm-hmm. Like you really don't get to be as I think communicative and open about what's going on with everyone. And the people person can be kind of a partner in that. And I think we got there in our relationship, which was nice to have, I think, for you and also for me, because I was able to do my job better knowing what you were thinking.
Yeah. It was, and thank God we got there.
I know, right? Yeah. All right, so let's talk for a second about maybe what everyone's interested in, the acquisition of Spyce. Because I think when a lot of people start a startup, maybe you're hoping to stay private and profitable. Maybe you're hoping for an IPO, but I think an acquisition is actually a good outcome as well. And I've heard you talk about this in the past, and I'm curious, can you just give us some background about why did Spyce get acquired? Let's start there, and then we'll talk about the actual process.
Yeah. So we got to, roughly the summer of 2020, fall of 2020. We have two restaurants, but it's 2020, so the two restaurants are not doing well. At that point, the company had raised a little over almost $25 million. And, when a company has raised $25 million, there's a board. well, there's a board. And there's a board that cares because that's real capital. And because the restaurants were doing poorly, we were losing cash fairly quickly. And also because we had a big corporate team. We were building robotics and automation. So even if the restaurants were doing well, we would have still needed to continue to raise capital. And there comes a point when you've got a certain amount of capital left where you have to decide, okay, what comes next? Is it the natural thing is we'd raise a Series A. So what comes after a Series A? We'll raise a Series B. Which is easy to, not easy, but it's reasonable to do if the business is doing well.
Yeah, that time coming out of COVID, a lot of companies actually thrived during COVID. And so funding was available for them. It would have been challenging for us to raise that Series B, right?
It would have been challenging. And if we did raise it, it would have been not enough capital really to sustain the business. It maybe would have bought another year or so. And I remember there was a board meeting in October of 2020 that we were about to launch this big delivery thing that Lydia had mentioned, and we were sort of like banking our hopes on maybe we can turn the business around if we really, really lean into delivery. Like what a brilliant night, we were so.
No one's ever tried that before.
Exactly. But we had agreed in that board meeting that we're going to give ourselves 1 quarter. Okay, so we're going to reevaluate in March of 2021. And if it's still going south, we're going to try to sell the company. And I think the reason we said that is because sell the company can mean a lot of things. It can mean sell the company for zero, like that's still selling the company. It can mean sell the company and investors get their money back. Selling the company can mean sell it and, maybe shareholders make a little money. Like it can mean a wide variety of things. But the important part was that we agreed we were not going to raise a Series B because when you raise more capital, you raise the bar for how much you have to sell the company for later. And so, right around then, I wish we'd raised less money. But it didn't take us until March. It was in January of 2021. We had another board meeting, and I remember in that board meeting I said we should sell the company, and it doesn't matter for how much. But we're not going to continue because at that point we had 1 year of cash left, even when we drew out all of our loans and just like if we stretched it out, it was 1 year. Realistically, it was less.
How did you get comfortable with that decision? Because that had to have been tough for you. I mean, you've been building this thing; it was your baby. So, what made you comfortable with the decision ultimately to say that? Because what I'm envisioning is, I think, and I've seen actually founders unable to make that decision and instead do the maybe more rash thing of raise another round or try to run it out for that year. You were pretty calculated about it.
It was two things. The first was, I remember we had a conversation in the fall when I was really freaking out. And you were like, Michael, what is the absolute worst thing that happens? And I said, the worst thing that happens is we give it to Sweetgreen for free. And then you were like, is that really that bad? Like you get everybody, you get to keep the dream alive. Everybody remains employed. You get to do the same thing. And then I took a step back and I was like, holy shit, it's really not that bad. Or at least it's not as catastrophic as versus completely dying, like everybody getting laid off, filing Chapter 11 or whatever, but truly winding it down. And so I kind of made my peace with, I was okay with selling it for free because it was much better than the alternative of really winding it down. The second thing was that Sweetgreen had approached us a year prior because they were interested in the technology. So we knew, Sweetgreen among others, but we knew there was interest from a number of companies out there, not in the business. Most of them thought the business sucked, but they were interested in the technology. And I think that gave us enough confidence to feel we can put all of our eggs in this basket. I said two things, but really it was three things. I was exhausted. I was really exhausted. I didn't have it in me to keep going or to keep struggling in that way. When you're winning, it's easy. After 2 years of losing, it was really hard. Yeah.
I do think you made an interesting point, though, I just want to call out, which is ultimately the value of Spyce was in the robotics. It was in the technology. It wasn't actually in the operations. And I think sometimes people forget that when a company is acquired, they're being acquired for a specific piece of it, not for everything you've done. And this segues into the question I want to ask, which was the really tough one at the time, which was, what was the impact on the team, really? Because ultimately, how many people, when Spyce was acquired, how many people are still working at Sweetgreen to this day from the original team?
Almost everyone.
Yeah.
Well, almost everyone who transitioned.
Right. Who didn't transition?
Right. We had a marketing team, an HR team, and a culinary team, and restaurant operations team. Yeah. So there was about 10 people that didn't transition. Yeah. And that was hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember we had to make those calls over Zoom because again it was COVID and we didn't have a reason. Most of those team members were working remote, and we didn't have a reason to ask them to come in because it would have seemed very suspicious. So we had to do them over Zoom. And I remember we did the first one as a group. We said, hey, Spyce is getting acquired. And ultimately it means that your job is not going to exist. And I know I cried after that call. I don't know if everyone else did, but it was a really tough call to deliver.
Yeah. Those were tough times. And I don't think about those calls too much now.
Probably for the best. But something I want to call out for you, and it's kind of a lesson for founders, if you're going through an acquisition, people want what you have. You negotiated really well for the team. Mm-hmm. Like we were able to give, can I share what the severance was? It's been long enough, or is that off limits still?
No, I think you can share.
Yeah, I think we gave everyone who left, 8 months of severance, which is, if you've never been laid off, the standard I work in HR is 2 weeks for every year you've worked for a company. So 8 months is very, very generous on top of the equity meant something. So, but you had to negotiate for that. Like I'm sure Sweetgreen was like, we don't want to pay that.
Yeah, I think the thing is with acquisitions that I learned is that we only read in the news about the blockbuster acquisitions, and we read about the companies that totally go bust and fail. And the truth is that there's a really, really huge murky world of in-between of startups that get acquired, but it's not a blockbuster. And in those scenarios, there are all sorts of different levers. And it's, I also thought you get bought for a price and that's it. And it's actually so much more complicated than that because there's retention grants, and then there's severance packages, and then there's debt that needs to be repaid. And so there's so much more to it, and it does mean that, as a founder, you have the ability to sort of navigate it and manage it the way, sort of prioritize what you need to prioritize. And in our case, it was the people. It was the people.
You really did. Yeah. I mean, I've gone through acquisitions since then where that wasn't the focus, and it turns out very differently. So I don't know, if you're ever going to be a startup employee, try to find founders or owners who tend to be employee focused. Yeah. It'll be better for you. I'm curious, we've kind of already touched on it, but what do you wish, if anything, more people understood ultimately about acquisitions? I think you touched on that. There's a lot of murky middle ground. Is there anything else you think would be helpful for people to be keeping in mind?
I mean, I'm not just saying this because this is a people-focused talk, but I did not really appreciate the amount of HR effort that goes into an acquisition. The first people that were looped in from both companies were the HR folks. Because an acquisition is about the business or the technology. An acquisition can be about the business or it can be about the technology. But in all situations, it's about the people. And gosh, there was a lot of legwork that went into figuring out how this would work. And then the other thing is, I remember, when you get acquired by a company, you spend months talking to that company about what the plan is. And ultimately, we didn't pick Sweetgreen because they paid the highest price. We picked Sweetgreen because we aligned on the plan of what to do so much better than we did with any other company. And a lot of people ask me, so why are you still there? Isn't the point is to sell it and go start the next thing or whatever? And in some situations, it absolutely is, and that's totally fine. But in a lot of situations, it's not. like the journey didn't end there. The journey kind of just continued there. Now it's been 3.5 years, and I attribute the fact that it's been a successful 3.5 years because we did a lot of upfront planning and alignment. We went as far as to align what the budget would be for the first 5 years, right? Like, so we could just make sure that both parties were on the same page as to how much this, this would cost, and how fast we were going to grow, and how fast we were going to hire the team. Like, all those things are things that we went really deep on, and I would say nobody talks about. Everybody only talks about what the price negotiation was, and that's kind of it. Yeah.
And I'm actually curious. Maybe you could tell everybody, because I know, and I'm assuming knowledge that no one else in this room has. The original idea for Spyce was you were going to automate a restaurant.
Yeah.
What are you now doing at Sweetgreen? Like, talk us through where we are now, because what I think it's cool to highlight is, even though I've not been with Spyce/Sweetgreen now for 3.5-4 years, what I signed up to build still exists and is still growing and making impact. And even though I don't have a hand in it anymore, though I actually can see their offices from my house, which is funny. So I wave to you. I'm sure you don't see me, but I wave. I find a lot of gratification that something I committed years of my life to still exists and is still making an impact. So maybe tell us about what you're all doing now.
Yeah. So at Spyce, we built this product we called the Infinite Kitchen, which is an automated system that makes bowls and salads. And at Sweetgreen, we basically took that technology, Infinite Kitchen, adapted it a little bit for Sweetgreen to make sure it works well for our operation at Sweetgreen, our menu, et cetera. And now we're scaling it at Sweetgreen. At our last public earnings call, we disclosed that we have it in 12 stores, and the plan is to double that in 2025. And so we're very much sort of like continuing what we were building at Spyce. And I would definitely say that is something that was really important to us when we were selling the company. We didn't want to sell and then build something new. We'd worked so hard on the thing we'd already built. And Sweetgreen was absolutely the best fit for it. The other thing I'll say, and I'll bring it back to mission. This is a people-focused talk, but I'll kind of pause on the people piece for a second. Was at Spyce, we decided that our mission was to enable people to live healthier lives. And who here has been to Sweetgreen? Who's familiar at least? Right. And so like the fit was just so good. And the first time we sat down with the Sweetgreen founders, we sort of realized like, oh wow, like this is such a good fit. And so it's definitely been a different experience, but it has been just as gratifying. Yeah.
So we're going to open it up to questions now, but I'm going to give people a second to maybe think about questions rather than have that awkward pause where like questions and no one says anything for like 30 seconds and we panic and go, oh gosh, no one's going to say anything and we're going to sit here for 30 minutes just staring at each other awkwardly. Have I filled enough time? Does someone have a question? Great, thank you.
I'm just curious, as you were taking over HR, you were trying to set up what feedback and performance reviews look like at a company that big. How do you do it where it works for a startup of that size?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And you mentioned, I got there, you already had something that I think Yale had kind of put in places. Do I remember that correctly? Yeah.
There was like a Google Doc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think where I always start when I join a company and I'm doing fundamental things like performance reviews, compensation philosophy, leveling and titling, it's really to talk with typically founders, if it's a founder-led company, or leadership, and I go like, what are we trying to achieve at this company? And the example I give, actually I give this a lot when I interview. I feel like I've had a lot of jobs at this point. A company I've worked for since Spyce had a very different culture than Spyce. They had a very aggressive culture, I'll put it that way. So the performance management process that we built there, completely different than what we built at Spyce. The one at this company had like, if you're familiar with a forced bell curve, it's the idea that like everybody gets a performance ranking, you have to give a certain number of ones out. So even if you have a really great team, I'm still making you tell me that someone on your team is not great. That is because that is the culture the board member and funder wanted, actually, which was complicated. So it is thinking about what culture do I want, and then what system is going to enable it. At Spyce, we were a little bit more focused, I think, on collaboration and being a little bit more, I think it was a little bit more we wanted to grow together. So we certainly had direct feedback in our performance review process, but it was much more focused on conversations and getting people comfortable talking to each other, rather than putting really aggressive metrics and numbers on people and going, you all are ones. And that.
Right.
Do you remember that conversation? Yeah.
I just refreshed my memory.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah. You'll be surprised how early employees seek it. Like, I think I was like, we're a 9-person company, why do we need it? But I was surprised at how early some of the employees felt like we needed that structure.
Why did they want it? Do you remember? I can speak to it, but I'm curious.
I know. I honestly don't.
Yeah, so it's this kind of goes back to you and Brady and Kale and Luke had never been employees. You've been interns. You interned at SpaceX, I know. And you actually used that as an example one time, and I went, that's different. You were not an employee. So I don't think you would experience what it's like to be an employee. And so a lot of the coaching that I would offer you at the time was like, try to put yourself in the shoes of an employee. And I don't know who here's, some people in this room I know have been employees. I think some people have been interns. Maybe some people have already co-founders. Speaking as an employee myself, I've never been a founder. You want to know how you're doing. Like, it's just, we spend so much of our lives at work, and I don't think your life should be all work, but you ultimately just do end up spending a lot of your time there. You want to know that you're doing good work. You want to know that you're meeting or exceeding. You just want to hear feedback and be better. And so people are going to ask for it, and if you're not ready to give it, it really kind of, I think, impacts how people feel coming to work. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Did that answer it? Yeah. Awesome. Okay, what else?
All right, I'm Scott Blanks. I'm a founder. I own a dispensary in New Jersey. And my question is, really has to do with boards, because it's a family business. And it's me and my dad, and then we have, our C-suite. But when is there time to have a board? What's the purpose of a board? When do I know it's time? We're looking to, either acquire another dispensary or expand, and it's like, okay, is that the point where I look for a board? Because my dad's very much like, keep it a family, don't ask other people to break with it.
The question was,
You're so much better than I am for repeating the question.
I got a reminder. The question was, when is the right time to have a board? There isn't a right answer, but for a venture-backed company, you will have a board, because folks that lead your rounds will want a seat on the board. I would say that not every company has to have a board. Sometimes just having informal advisors or paid advisors makes more sense than having a board. But a board makes most sense when no single entity owns a huge chunk of the company. Like, once the company is a shared entity between co-founders and investors and employees, then there needs to be a board to represent all of those interests, versus a family-owned business where maybe the family owns 80% or 100% or whatever. Maybe it makes less sense. In fact, I would say it definitely makes less sense in that context. And at Spyce, we raised several rounds of funding. We have 4 co-founders, and so, not one individual or entity owned a huge chunk. It was truly this shared, living, breathing entity, and the board was there to represent those interests.
And I think the board was actually a very productive board at Spyce. Is that fair to say?
100%.
Yeah, they gave you good advice, a good perspective. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that they helped me see what, all of the, every shareholder has slightly different motivations, and I think the board helped bring all those groups together and have really productive, important conversations. Yeah.
I will say on the flip side, and what I'm sort of like teasing is, I have seen less effective boards at companies I've worked for. So I think a board can be a strength. I think it also can be a hindrance in certain situations. So if you're considering a board, be very intentional about the purpose of it and who is going to make the right fit for it. And in some cases, you don't have a choice. If you're raising funds, the person who joins your board comes from the VC, and you hope they're a good partner.
Yeah, and there's always an independent board member, and picking that person is like a really, really important, because that person ends up being, especially if you're a young founder, that person ends up being a really close mentor as well, helps you navigate the board dynamics. Yeah, it's a mix. It's a mix of governance. It's a mix of mentorship. It's a mix of truly getting everybody's opinions. Yeah, it's navigating the board was a gratifying and learning experience, I would say.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So start with the question and then provide the context. The question is, what have you learned through your experience in Spyce and entrepreneurship that has made you a better person outside of work? Because I thought it was interesting that Lydia mentioned, like, I consider myself very different. Here's my personal life, here's my work life. I think many of us are not honest enough about the traits that we carry across those spaces. Like, being a venture investor has actually made me better in my personal life because I'm more open to uncertainty. I don't pretend I know what the next 3 steps are going to be. So I'm just curious what your experiences have been on that front.
Repeat the question.
The question was, how has the startup or entrepreneurship experience shaped your personality in your personal life, or how you approach things in your personal life? Did I get that right?
And made you better.
And made you better. Yeah. Or worse. Or worse.
Let's go.
I think you should go first.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I love the work I do. I really do. It is challenging. It is tiring, but I really love it. And the reason I love it is because I feel like I actually make an impact every day. Like, it could be a very small one, like I'm answering a very mundane benefit question, but to that person, like, I've made an impact in their life in a very small way. And that's something I don't think I appreciated about the specific work I do early on. Like, I kind of fell into HR. I was in a more ops-focused role, fell into HR, thought it was cool, went to grad school because why wouldn't one go to grad school? And then got the job at Spyce and realized that this work actually can be very impactful. And the way it's translated into my personal life is I think I'm more intentional now about what I do in my personal life. It's going to be a silly example, but I like silly examples because we're all here to have fun, and it's past 8 and we're tired. I'm tired. I've always been intentional about community and wanting to have a community around me and wanting my community to feel like they matter to me. So last week, my husband and I had a party. It was a good beer, cheap pizza party. We got like pizzas from all the cheap places, Papa John's, Domino's, had great beer, lots of fun. Would recommend the theme, you can have it. I have a great GPT generated image if you want it. It's a pizza pilot driving a liver. Anyway, but I had this party. It was a great party, had a blast. But the next day, there was a friend at the party who left kind of early. Isn't usually someone to leave early. So I texted her and I'm just like, hey, maybe you're tired. I don't want to I don't want to read into this, but like, you doing okay? And she opened up and she's like, no, actually, like X, Y, and Z is happening. And I think 5-10 years ago, I would have been much more like, almost like flippant about it. But now having seen how small things at work make an impact, I try to bring that to my personal life and be more deliberate in how small things there can matter. And that was kind of a winding answer, but I hope it answered.
I had a lot of time to prepare.
I was mostly filling time for you.
I think it's made me a better husband. Because, and maybe not the entrepreneurship in general, but working in a large team, leading a large team, I've learned to be much more empathetic than I used to be prior to this journey, and I think that's really translated like into my personal life. And I think I've heard your husband say at least once.
Okay, but he says don't HR speak me. He's saying it like he doesn't want it. No, it's a joke, I think. What else? Other questions? Did you have one? Yeah.
I did, but I just wanted to see if anyone else had questions because we're past 8. Okay.
Yeah, back there. Yeah.
Your talk, I know you mentioned initially that your vision was automate
Great
I
question.
love that question. Yeah, that's a good question. At the time, I didn't really feel confident that we could build something that could work for a lot of restaurants. And just to be clear, the question was, why build a restaurant versus just sell the technology, right? Yeah, so if there was an obvious way to sell technology to restaurants, I think we perhaps may have pursued it. At the time, we were really struggling to find a way to do that. Not that we tried that hard, but it seemed like, gosh, like all these different restaurants, they serve different menus, and they have different operations, and the kitchens are different sizes, and had a hard time fathoming how we could build something that could be applied to a lot of different restaurants. And then the second came to the passion for food. We were really excited to serve healthy food. And at the time I didn't even know what Sweetgreen was. Like Sweetgreen was like not that widespread, certainly hadn't come to Boston at that point. And so we felt as though like this combination of like the technology and also the healthy food made a lot of sense. We were also dreamers, we were in our early 20s and we just dreamed. And the first part of that is actually still true today. It's kind of like, it's still my thesis today is like, I think we're successful at Sweetgreen because we are part of Sweetgreen. They're not our customer. We are part of, so we get to build it together, hand in hand. And I think that's part of what makes us successful.
You really were dreamers because running restaurants is hard.
It's really, really hard.
It is hard.
Yeah.
You were signing up for the hard road.
Right. And at the time, I thought that was going to be the easy part.
Oh, lessons learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else?
Thank you so much. I'm really curious about how maybe the ideal corporate culture that you had at Spyce is disseminated or maybe trickled down from the corporate level to restaurant level hourly team members. Yeah, the interplay between corporate and hourly.
Do you want me to? I'll start.
Yeah.
I'll start with this, but I think you can add to it. You're like, no, take it. The question was, how did the corporate and asterisk on that corporate culture sort of disseminate down to the restaurants? The asterisk on corporate is we were very intentional actually not to call ourselves corporate because that alone felt very like othering, like us, them. Also, we weren't really corporate. We were, I think the most we were like 30 people, and we worked out of a co-working space, and I think you mostly wore sweatpants to the office. Like we were not corporate by any means. It's a boring answer, but it's the right answer. It's intentionality, right? So it's being intentional about it, but it's also being intentional about how do you tailor it to the needs of each group. So I think a great example of that is Spyce did a lot of kind of quirky things. We were an odd bunch. We had a lot of fun. And a lot of that happened like we would sometimes do gatherings at lunch for the team at our co-working space. A lot of our hourly team can't do that, right? They can't take time out of their work to come have lunch with us, and it doesn't make sense, nor probably do they want to. They want to do their job and go home, and I get that as well. So how do we disseminate that in a different way in that space, right? So we had different ways we tried to achieve the same outcome. Hey, we're fun, we're quirky, but we didn't demand that everyone kind of observe that in the same way. I think the other thing that we were very intentional about, and again, credit to Brady and Luke for this, Brady and Luke, the co-founders who were kind of head of engineering, they were very intentional that our mechanical engineers had as much to learn from our restaurant team as the restaurant team had to learn from the mechanical engineers. So although the mechanical engineers were building the robotics, the cool thing, the restaurant team is really, they knew about how to prep food. They knew about what was going to work in the machine. It's actually, I don't want to talk more than you do because you experienced this much more than I did. Certain ingredients do not do well dispensing in tubes. I think the restaurant team knew that right off the bat and said, you can't put tomatoes in there. They're going to get crushed. Just having that like transfer of knowledge. All the mechanical engineers had to do at least one shift in the restaurant, I think every couple months. I don't remember exactly the cadence. I went and did shifts, I think, every quarter in our prep kitchen, which our prep kitchen worked overnight. So I just went to experience what is it like to chop eggs at 1 a.m. Important to understand that, right? Like I had a concept in my head, but it was good to go experience that and appreciate it. And also, get FaceTime with our team who, frankly, I didn't see very often because they were working at a time when I wasn't. Anything to add?
No, I think you nailed it.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? I think one of my favorite photos is one of my shifts at the commissary kitchen because I look both so excited and so confused. I forget exactly what I was doing.
Yeah, those were hard shifts. Those were hard shifts.
I'm just curious, okay, so Lydia, you shared that you joined other startups, but in different capacities as an HR people person. I'm curious for Michael, do you miss being in such an early stage environment? And I'm curious if there are certain aspects or traits that you miss and others that you will never need again. I'm just curious.
There's certainly things that I will like miss in a nostalgic kind of way, like just like this conversation like brings back some really, really good fond memories. But no, I don't wake up every day wishing I was doing it again. I feel like I'm still doing it, and that gives me the gratification that I need. And I don't miss the stress. I don't miss the stress of running out of cash. Probably that, I would say.
I'll add, I think what you're doing, there is a difference between entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, and it's semantics, right? But intrapreneurship is when you can be innovating inside of a bigger company. It can be risky because if the company doesn't really want your innovations, it's kind of a recipe in disaster and frustration. But Sweetgreen genuinely wanted you to be building exciting new things. They've pretty much let you be to do that. And you have the support of a bigger corporation, which is actually really nice. So it's actually a nice situation to be in.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm speaking for you, but I'm jealous.
No, that's absolutely correct. Yeah.
I still do secretly hope that Michael and I work together again.
Me too.
If only you know. No.
Well, actually, if I do, one thing I really miss is we had this, unbelievable culture of having all of these different minds, like culinary, operations, HR, marketing, and engineering, like working in such tight quarters. Yeah. And it's not like we don't have these things at Sweetgreen, but Sweetgreen's a much bigger company, and in the Boston office, it's just the engineering team. I miss that type of like daily collaboration and, call it like, I don't know, like super creative problem solving from people of different backgrounds. Like I definitely miss that. Yeah.
Maybe you should pitch that idea. Maybe not daily, but every quarter you should go work at Sweetgreen. I don't think you like that idea.
So I think we're supposed to go to 8:30. It's 8:15 now. People are happy to peel off. Are there any other questions and again, I'm filling time in case somebody is nervously putting their hand up. Is there any parting thoughts that you want to share, Michael, not to put you on the spot? But I do see a question back there, so you're saved.
I got one follow-up just from that, you doing in the early meetings, the
Fistify
thing. So if someone did, I'm sure there were definitely meetings where someone had strong feedback about it. Is that something you just said, all right, let's open and talk about it, or how did you go about it?
So the question is, back when we were doing the Fistify, if someone gave you a 2, when your CEO gave you a 2, would you deal with it? No. How would you respond if someone had strong feedback? So it's actually interesting that you gave that example. I have never done Fistify in any company since Spyce. I do it a lot in my vol, but I'll talk about why. Because it's actually, it's good. It's not a good thing. It's a good thing for Spyce. I do it a lot in my volunteer work, but I don't do it a lot in the workplace. Spyce had a culture that enabled that. People felt comfortable. It's a term, psychological safety, which you've probably heard of, but if you haven't heard of it, or if you have heard of it, go read about it tonight because it's so important. People felt safe to speak up there. Like, people felt safe to disagree. I've worked in many great companies. But it was different there. I don't think there was that level of psychological safety. So instead, I source feedback in other ways, usually one-on-ones. Afterwards, I go, hey, what did you think? Or I use a lot like surveys because it's a little bit more like private. But yeah, I think because we had a culture where people felt comfortable giving that feedback, I also felt comfortable taking that feedback. Like, 'cause I knew it was coming from a genuine place. You were putting yourself on the spot. I don't know if you felt uncomfortable. Did you feel uncomfortable giving it to? You're a bad example. I think other people you're putting yourself
I
on the
would
spot.
now. I would feel uncomfortable.
Okay, you would feel
now.
uncomfortable now because you've learned something.
I've learned empathy.
Empathy, that's the word. Okay, I wasn't going to give the word, you did. If someone's feeling comfortable enough to put themselves in the spot to say, I actually didn't find this meeting useful, I have to then be comfortable enough to accept that feedback. And then usually I would say, hey, I'd like to follow up with you after the meeting and talk one-on-one. But yeah, I haven't done it in years now. It actually might work with my current team now. I might bring it back with my current team and see how it goes.
Every now and then, I do it. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be like, remember when Lydia used to do Fist of Five? It's usually when we're a little worried I wasted everybody's time and I need the reassurance that I didn't.
Another helpful way to do is to ask a more specific question, not necessarily like, how was this meeting? Fist of Five, do you feel like this meeting answered this question? Like, it's a helpful way to gauge it to achieve the goal. That's a more safe way to ask it.
So I have a question along these lines of culture. So there was a lot of intentional work up front that was done to build a culture of the startup. And then you were acquired and you live in what sounds to be a pretty happy space right now. Did the culture translate? And how did it do in this new space?
The culture,
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'll repeat the question. We did a lot of intentional work to build a culture at Spyce, and then we were acquired. Did the culture translate? We had I would say by and large, the culture absolutely translated. But there did come a point in the culture when we had to stop sort of like holding on to old things that maybe we used to do. For example, we used to do these fun things with the chefs where they'd cook something, but we didn't have chefs in our office anymore. And so we had to
Friday
also,
fridge clean out. It's when stuff was going bad and then they would
Yeah.
make something for all of us. It was great.
Right.
I miss that.
I forgot about that. Gosh, I miss
So
it
good.
too. But then, there was a bit of an intentional effort, mostly by Brady, to hold on to some things, but also just let go of some things and not try to always hold on to the past, because you do hire new people, and if you're constantly reminiscing of the good old days or whatever, it's like it doesn't give a great vibe. So I would say in general Brady was quite intentional about maintaining a culture. But after about the first 6 months, we let go of a few things, like Spyce names, for example, that we decided were too Spyce, and we needed to build something more Sweetgreen.
Yeah. And I'll speak from, I've since been in a role where I was part of the acquiring company, and we actually, over the course of a year and a half, acquired 6 companies. It was fun. I didn't sleep a lot. And if you're trying to maintain a culture in acquisition, you want the acquiring company to embrace that to some extent. Not all of them do. Something that I would do, I would ask the team that's coming in, what is something you all love doing? And I would try to bring that into our larger culture as a way to sort of welcome them in. So I think it was a good way to sort of be like, you're bringing in a new piece, and we're not going to build it into what we've been doing already.
Yeah, I also have to say credit to Sweetgreen. The Sweetgreen founders struck a perfect balance of allowing us to maintain some of our own culture while also helping us build in some Sweetgreen culture in as well. Like, it's a fine line. Like, you don't want to draw the line of like, well, we're like just we're still Spyce, right? It's like you don't want to hold on to that so strongly, but at the same time you want to maintain some of your identity. And like they did a nice job. Go ahead.
I had a question concerning sort of from the idea aspect to the prototype. So when it comes to startup and working with multiple co-founders, like how did you guys come up with a system and structure to make sure that you guys are actually attaining goals at an earlier stage where you don't have people or boards or people actually asking you about like benchmarks? Like how did you build that discipline, and also how did you build that like space where all of you were meeting your goals and exchanging ideas and making sure everyone was a part of it?
I'm going to repeat the question for you, which is, I'm going to paraphrase it slightly, and you fistify me if I get it right. How do you hold each other accountable as early stage founders when you don't have a board or a team? So how do you make sure that you're setting and progressing toward goals at that early stage? Was that, honestly, fist of 5? 5? Love it. Thank you. I would have taken a 4 or 3 too, but.
In the very early days, it was programs like this one at MIT, where we, it was a 1-month program, and we had a goal to build a prototype and make a video. And so for a month, we sat down in the basement and we just did that. And then we were quite realistic about what we would achieve during the semester, which was not a whole lot. But then in the summer, we'd all commit to, okay, we're not going to get internships. We're not going to like travel the world. Like, we're all going to do this for the summer and join a different program in the summer. And all those different programs, and each one comes with a little bit of funding. That's sort of what kept us on track. After we'd raised capital, it changed a little bit, and I would say our discipline went away, actually. I like, once we were not in the context of of various entrepreneurship programs and accelerators and so forth, and once we were kind of like on our own, I would say it actually took us quite a while to develop any sort of structure around timelines, and it was much more organic than that. And I'm not saying we did a great job of it. In fact, I would say like other early stage startups have done a much better job than we have.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has your relationship changed with them since being friends, co-founders, to now just colleagues?
I would say we went from friends to co-founders to co-workers to friends again at Spyce. Like at Spyce, there was a point in time where we were really co-workers because we just worked so hard. It's like when you work so hard and you work till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock with someone, it's like, do you really want to hang out with them after work? And then, Kale said we should do co-founder dinners.
They did. They went to monthly dinners, which I thought was so sweet.
Yeah.
They really did.
Yeah, every month it was on the calendar. Every month, sure enough, it would pop up and we'd have to go to dinner together.
Like at 5 p.m., they'd all walk out together. We'd all be like, oh, co-founder dinner.
You did what?
Oh, yeah. No, that didn't happen.
The rule was we can't talk about work. Co-founder dinner was to not talk about work. And that sort of helped make us back to being friends. It mostly came from Kale. Kale was like, I miss being friends with you guys. And so, yeah, we put in some intentional effort to go back to being friends. And we decided also that we were going to be both coworkers and friends. Like, it was a decision we made. And now, two of them are next door neighbors.
They literally bought houses next to each other.
Not a coincidence. They bought houses next to each other.
Deliberately did.
One is officiating the other's wedding. So we're very, very close friends. Much more, we're as close friends as much closer now than we ever have been in our journey. Yeah.
All right. Last question or parting words, if you've had time to think about anything.
I think this is a people-focused discussion, and I think you should do the parting words.
Sure. It's not going to be eloquent. It is going to be thinking about who is in this room, which is mostly people either have started something, is planning on starting something. Likely you will be the founder or co-founder. Kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, put yourself in your team's shoes as much as possible if you want to be a good founder and lead a good team. At an early stage company, I think it's kind of easy to feel a little bit of separation. Early on, I think I told you it's your baby, but it's all of our nieces or nephews. Like, we still love this thing we're building, but doesn't mean to us the same thing it means to you. And I think because you were frustrated that people maybe weren't as committed as you were. And so I think it's that perspective that people are here, they love what you're doing, they want to build it with you, they wouldn't have taken probably pay cuts and the risk if they weren't excited. But they're going to feel differently about it than you will, and try to see it from their perspective as much as possible and build it thinking about their needs as well as the company needs. That was more eloquent than I thought it was going to be. Was it okay?
I love that.
Aw,
I love
all right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.